What do a vice president, a truck driver, an accounting manager, and a high-level executive have in common? Sounds like a bad joke? I wish it was. Sadly, it's not. They're all perpetrators of various types of P-card fraud. Our guest, commercial card industry expert, Recharged Education's Lynn Larson, is joining us today to share some real-life examples of card fraud that has occurred at organizations just like yours. Of course, she'll also educate us on how the fraud could have been prevented or at least detected sooner. If you think that your employees would never play games with their company credit cards, the numbers tell a very different story. Make sure you stick around until the end when Lynn shares one example that has occurred at almost every organization, including most likely yours. All right, Lynn, so let's dive right in with your first story. I love these stories.
We're going to start with an executive. He was the CEO for a nonprofit organization, and it was one that assisted low-income people. It's almost like it makes this whole thing even worse. But it took years. I mean, within a multi-year span, he spent thousands of dollars every month using that company card for personal purchases. It was a new car. It was expensive trips, gifts for different girlfriends. And so, you start to wonder, like, okay, who was monitoring things? There was a local government local organization that fulfilled some type of audit role. But I have to say, it made me wonder initially, like, how frequently did these audits even occur?
Or did they?
Well, exactly. So that's just the bottom line. When I get all my details, from the news stories, of course, and maybe there's more to it. But when I dug into it, there appear to have been no documented card program policies and procedures. So here you go. That is a one, thing you have to have. And people might be going, of course, listen to this, but not every organization is that thorough. I mean, it really seemed like this guy had free reign just to do whatever it was that he wanted. And what also made things worse is supposedly he bullied his employees. He had fired some if they started to ask too many questions about his activity. He had the backing of some local politicians, some of whom were on the organization's board. Again, this was a nonprofit. And then, to top it all off, when, things were getting a little hotter in the kitchen, the heat in the kitchen, he claimed unfair treatment. People were unfairly, approaching him. So fast forward, he did end up pleading guilty to 16 counts of fraud and theft. And there's a lot of evidence. So, I want to just go through like, why could this have happened? I mean, again, no company should ever hand out company credit cards without rules, and you need ongoing monitoring. And no job position should be exempt from oversight or disciplinary action. I mean, it's so sad, especially in this case. You might think, oh, well, they had this board, but how active were they really? And, that audit or the organization department that was supposed to be auditing, that needs to be established, with a very consistent, structured schedule. And, not just that, I mean, audit to me is sort of that third piece of card fraud. There should have been, the board's oversight on a monthly basis at a minimum. So every organization needs to have that in place. Also, you have to have a way where employees can bring their concerns, anonymously, perhaps, regarding, especially when you start talking about that C-suite, is there a way for employees to express their concerns? Because as I mentioned, when employees did question him, he fired them. And so that is not useful one bit, as we know. And I think we know from past studies done by the, was it the Association
of Fraud Examiners?
Yeah, certified fraud examiners. They say consistently that it tends to be a hotline of some sort.
Yes,
that is
anonymous hotline
for uncovering things like this. So, that should have been in place. Also, before anyone gets a card to use for business purposes, besides those policies and procedures, there should be some kind of sign off that the employee, again, no matter what job level, is clear on what the rules are and what might happen if they break those rules. And it should say something about the rules are in effect for everyone, regardless of job position, age, gender, ethnicity. You got it. Everyone needs to be treated fairly. And of course, you have to follow through on that. It's one thing to have a document employee sign that say that, but if you give certain people preferential treatment, that's not going to work well
No.
for your organization either. So
No.
that was the biggest thing. There was no policies and procedures, no auditing, no oversight, and it went on forever. And boom, here we are. The organization, and to be honest, I don't know if the organization even exists anymore.
Right.
But he ended up pleading guilty.
Good. I believe the next story you have to share is about a multifaceted fraud. And again, by a VP. We're working, by the way, Lynn and I talked before, and we're working down the corporate ladder, if you will.
Exactly. I mean, we're demonstrating that fraud can happen at all levels, executive on down the line, and that's what we're doing. So here's an example, and I think this is very common, where if somebody you find is committing one type of internal fraud, it's very likely possible that they are doing something else as well. That is, their fraud is not limited to one avenue. And so in this particular example, there had been a vice president for a healthcare company, and he had falsified mileage reports or submitted false mileage reports. He submitted false expense reimbursement requests. And you and I know, Mary, why do they even have expense reimbursement requests? Everything should go on the card because it's easier to catch things.
But they still have to account for them.
Right. And then to top it all off, he did use the company card for personal purchases.
I'm sure.
And he did finally, plead guilty to, theft by swindle. He'll be serving prison time. But, this is a story where it went on for more than 10 years. I mean, this is really crazy. And based on this particular state's laws, there was only a 5-year statute. And so what they could charge him with was just a chunk of the dollars that he spent, or used or obtained, fraudulently. It looks like, this exceeded $700,000. But because of that state statute, I think it just had to address maybe around 400,000. So it's a big chunk. This is a case, so what his crimes were. But here at one point, he was one of the top 2 employees receiving the highest mileage reimbursements. So that right there would make you question things, right? Look at the people who are doing something the most, whether it's the most mileage or the most expense reimbursements or the highest card spend. That can be a red flag to send you into maybe a little bit of a research pattern.
Just do a little, just check them out.
Exactly. Well, and in fact, this healthcare company, they informed him of his status. They reminded him that there was a company car available for his use, and he declined.
Of course.
And nobody questioned it. So that made me shake my head too, given what was going on. And then, things started to kind of unravel for this gentleman when they noticed his reports were different or disproportionate to other employees within the organization. Right. And, that had to do with the mileage and the expense reimbursements. They did some research finally that showed, revealed conflicts between his calendar and his usage of, like his company ID card, for getting in and out of the company. It's like he was in the office for the same times he was supposedly
mileage in.
Yes. And I suppose I don't know if there are easy fixes for this or easy reporting, but, I think that's just another sign. It's not just a card issue. Does your organization have ways to do some of this spot checking? If you do have, the secure ID cards for getting in and out, do you ever compare with, when they claim, for expense reasons that they were out of the office? So, that would be a good thing. And there, just all sorts of fabrications from there. And then when it came to, his expense report, he was claiming to have paid out of pocket to a particular printing company, and he was compensated.
No, right off the bat.
What's that?
That's a no right off the bat.
Well, exactly. Supposedly he spent more than $300,000 with this particular company. Well, once the investigation happened, they realized that none of the checks, that he was putting forth as proof of his out-of-pocket expense, they were never issued to this supposed vendor.
Mm.
And it had been a real vendor, but not for many, many years.
Yeah.
So no one even bothered to check that out. Who is he
Yeah.
paying? Why is he paying it out of pocket? He's got a company card. This is to me, again, just real lax in terms of
Right.
monitoring.
Right.
Uh,
Nobody should pay an invoice themselves and then put in for reimbursement. And anytime that happens, you should be on them, all over them. So it happens once.
Exactly.
If it's legitimate.
Well, exactly. So, I mean, you're beginning to see why this went on for more than 10 years.
Yeah.
When it came to the card, card fraud or personal purchases, he was making purchases for a lot of, event tickets, season tickets, sporting, professional sports teams. He even would convince, whomever he was buying the season tickets from, he would convince them to split up the charge into more than just one flat charge in an
So
effort.
he went under his limit.
Exactly, to disguise it. And I know pretty much every organization with their card policies and procedures, will indicate that or flat out say, we prohibit card transaction splitting, and that's what we're talking about.
Right.
But it's harder to catch. You need to have good auditing mechanisms in place. I mean, that's the bottom line. But again, even with the initial questioning of what this man was doing, I mean, they never really followed through. I mean, they tried to give
Nobody
wanted to push the issue.
Yeah.
So I think you have to audit your mileage claims. You need to have even a policy that enforces use of a company car. Car. Now we're talking car, not card. When someone is taking X amount of different business trips, it's just like you said. Don't reimburse employees for supposed invoices that don't have, that have no connection to a business trip. You need to pay attention to your vendor spend. In the card world, if I'm, paying different vendors, I mean, as a program manager, you should see who is all this money going to. So that's card or invoice related.
It also makes it hard to do actual versus budget.
Yeah.
Because it's not going through AP or even the card program. That I bet you that money never got allocated to the right budget category.
You have to wonder about that, So then you can say, well, then why, okay, setting aside the audit component, which every organization should have, why didn't a budget person start to question it? Exactly.
Yeah.
So there were just all these holes that allowed it to happen, and people seem to be so afraid again to question. Oh, it's someone above my job level. Right. You have to have mechanisms.
That's also an issue. Exactly. So, but if I recall from what you were telling me before we started, that's not the craziest fraud you've ever run into.
Well, we're just making our way down the line, Mary. You want me to just dive right into that one?
Yeah, and this is an accounting manager, I think.
There was an accounting manager, more than $12 million stolen over 6 years.
Oh my God.
And this is one where I have always said that the truth is stranger than fiction. Yeah. This guy was a former accounting manager for a university in the southeast part of the United States. He did eventually plead guilty to this. But besides making lavish personal purchases with the university's card, he got cash for himself through a unique source. So let me tell you. So he started working for the university back in like 2006, but it looks like he didn't start his crime spree until maybe 2014, right in there. And in terms of the card purchases, the personal purchases, it included things like a relative's wedding expenses. It was chartered yachts. It was home renovations. I mean, all of these things that really should have stood out had anybody been monitoring his expenses. But the majority of the stolen funds went to, are you ready? An adult website. That's what we'll call it here and keep this PG.
Be nice.
Yep. So he laundered money. There on this website, one of the profiles, one of the workers happened to be the fiance of one of his relatives. And so apparently he used the university's card to pay the woman that he recruited to help him with this scheme. So he would pay her, she would keep part of it, and then kick back to him, the rest via a check. So then that was all happening behind the scenes. Check wise, this thing that I'm describing about the money laundering. I mean, at one point, supposedly she sent him a check that was more than $18,000. I mean, we're not talking about 500 or 2,000 here, just crazy. And it wasn't until, several years later, 6, 7, whatever it was, years later, that management noticed a sizable increase in their expenses. Can you imagine that? And this is where, an investigation was started and he was terminated. But, there were so many control gaps. By the time, like about a year after he started committing these crimes, he had complete control of 4 card programs. And he had the sole authority to obtain new cards for whomever and change spend limits. And it appears nobody was monitoring, the new cards being issued. No one was monitoring when spend limit increases were taking place. So that's huge with separation of duties.
Right.
I mean, even if you're a small staff and you have no choice but to put most of this power, or all of the power, into one person's job role, there still has to be reports that management is looking at. There still has to be.
But Lynn, he got on average $2 million a year through the card program. That's not such a small organization.
Well, right. No, this was a larger university.
So, I mean, they should have had adequate personnel to have some sort of separation of duties and audit.
Oh, absolutely. No, for sure. And the other part of it, with him having been an accounting manager, he was falsifying journal entries. So he would disguise the charges on the university's card to look like legitimate business expenses. And, this is another separation of duties problem.
Right.
He shouldn't have been able to edit transaction information.
I hate journal entries for that reason.
I mean, and you can go directly to the card issuers reporting mechanisms. Go right to those systems to pull reports, and then you can compare it with what's ultimately ending up in your accounting systems.
Right.
Say, the top vendor according to us is Staples, but over here it's an adult website.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, if anybody had even
that, nobody except for him reviewed and approved card transactions. And this is where there should always be like a manager approver, is what I call it. That is one functional job level, at least, higher than the card holder.
Right.
And that manager person, and I know what you're going to say, managers don't look at stuff very faithfully.
They should. That's the flaw.
Well, they should. And then if you have a strong auditing program, behind it, then that will catch what a manager, might overlook or miss.
Right.
So, you've got that. But, it was clear to me too that, the auditing clearly wasn't done, or it was so ineffective that it allowed this type of behavior to go on for years.
Yeah.
It just, again, really points out another, budgeting problem. No one was monitoring until later. Why have we spent, all this money, regardless of where it was, but higher than the budgeted amounts? So,
and he had access to too many things, not only with the cards, but the journal entries and oh my God.
Yeah, this shouldn't have happened whatsoever.
No, and not for as long as it went on either.
No, I know. Yeah. I mean, this is crazy. And so I know people listen to stories like this, and let me say, Mary, cards are a very good product, but they have to be well controlled.
Right.
So these things happen when you do not have the right controls.
Right. And I mean, it's like auditing 101 or accounting 101, whatever you want to call it. One person should not have control over all the different aspects.
Exactly. Right. I mean, these are basic things, and do not give me the excuse that your staff is too small.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Not when you lost $2 million a year.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Enough about that. We could probably rant and rave forever.
Sure.
So you have one now, a more common one that won't raise our eyebrows as much.
Well, right. And at the beginning, you mentioned, it was a truck driver, and before you think, oh, we don't have truck drivers or any kind of, it doesn't apply to us. Well, yes, it does, because the bottom line action that he was doing, could be and probably has happened at some point within your organizations, no matter their job role. But this was just, a regular employee who was basically filling up the gas tanks of friends and family, using the company card. I mean, it's as simple as that.
You can have salespeople all over the place who have fuel cards.
Well, right.
Company cards for fuel. Yeah.
Right. I mean, and I've got other stories too that you and I are not even talking about, where it's like, let's, buy this for, sister or child or parent or whatever. Here, this is where the man's boss ultimately did catch Well, he noticed, the man's boss noticed suspicious activity. He noticed that the fuel costs had increased on average monthly, by thousands of dollars.
Okay.
Again, that's your tip off. If the spending suddenly goes whoop, and especially if you compare it to the past or compare it to other cardholders in other departments with similar jobs, and obviously as a manager, you might not know what's happening in another department, but you can manage your own department. And then the card program manager and or the auditing function should be seeing across the organization or company when there are some strange spikes, and who the biggest spenders are, and for what reason, and it should be questioned. And then in this particular case, this is fuel specific now, but again, what he did could be any type of employee, any type of purchase.
Right.
But with the fuel, it was revealed that of course this was unleaded gas, and his company vehicle was diesel.
Right. I mean, that's a dead giveaway.
Exactly.
If
exactly.
somebody looks.
Well, right. You have to look. And this too, I just say, going back to P Cards 101, recommended controls clearly defines, roles and responsibilities. Make sure that manager knows what his or her role is when it comes to supervising cardholders' activity. They should at least be spot checking. And, it wasn't until something really, became glaring to this manager, this boss, take action. But I think too, you have to have that training, mandated training that goes beyond just policies and procedures. Train managers on red flag behaviors that should warrant, further scrutiny. And it's, you have to be careful not to jump the gun. Don't accuse someone of fraud,
Right.
but know what types of things are reason to initiate some kind of investigation or research. You should also be looking at just your spend controls. Should any of your card holders have lower limits? Are their limits too high for what they're supposed to be buying?
Right.
You really have to think about that.
Right.
And then
it's
even
not, oh, he's a vice president, we can't give him a $500 card.
could
Yes,
be.
you can.
Well, right. I mean, that could be the thinking is what I'm getting at. But then too, is it the right type of card for the employee? So what I'm getting at in this case, but now this again can apply to any different situation. There are different types of commercial cards for different types of things. In this case, if he had had a true fleet card, something that has some additional controls like unleaded gas versus diesel, that could have stopped it right before it started, really.
Right.
So, why didn't this organization, have the right type of card? Then I'll just say, again, you get into the right reporting for department managers, for those manager approvers that can help them, or at least hopefully help them more quickly identify any out of the norm spending behaviors. And then that P card program manager has to be doing something too, as well as the audit function. So lots of things. I mean, if you take nothing away from this, clear policies and procedures, mandated training, train everybody in their respective roles, hold them accountable, look at reporting, have another level of
separation of duties.
Separation of duties. Yes, exactly. Yeah.
If you come away with nothing else. So as Lynn has mentioned, there's a lot of different cards, and there's been a lot of different innovation over the last few years. And in fact, Lynn recently identified 11 different types of commercial cards that are now in use. She joined us for a short video describing each type, which you can watch right now, and you probably should, using the link that will appear momentarily on your YouTube screen and is in the description below. As always, we appreciate your thumbs up as they help us grow, and the more thumbs up and comments we get, the more YouTube shares this recording and others with people who might like it and might benefit it. So a big thank you to everyone who takes the time to click the thumbs up button.